And as we wind out, this is the sad portion of the lecture. One of the things that was tough about teaching lifespan development is you build a rapport with your class over the semester, over the quarter, whichever it was. I did it both ways. And as we get tight, we share more time together, we become closer, we develop a rapport, and usually when you get to the end of the course, it's kind of this kind of happy time because here we are approaching completion. But in lifespan development, and I've talked to a lot of people who've taught the course, and I say, how do we do it differently? And it's hard to avoid the idea that lifespan development is going to end up talking about the end of life, and that is death. So that's where we need to go, and it's unfortunate. The good thing about this class is we're sandwiched in the middle of the semester, so we'll get to move past this. But in a lifespan development course, this would be probably the last lecture, right? Expanded. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross described when facing one's own death in her book On Death and Dying, which is an amazing work, right? She said that the denial is one of the initial responses. We're told that we have this life-threatening disease or this terminal illness, and we say, no, I don't, right? And we might isolate ourselves. We don't want to hear from anyone. And then we might shift into anger mode where we're angry, and sometimes we even curse the deity. We say, God, how can you do this to me? Right? I've been good all my life, and here you are giving me cancer or something. And then we bargain, and so now we might look at God again and say, hey, I promise to be good if you allow me to survive this. And initially, Kubler-Ross kind of laid this out as a straight line, and people interpret it that way, but reinterpretations by Kubler-Ross and others say we can kind of mill about in this cycle of these three. So today we might be denying, tomorrow we get angry, then we might do some bargaining, but then we might go back to denial. So we might loop around here with these three stages. At some point, though, as we begin to accept, and you can see where that's on the chart here, the acceptance, we say this is it, and this is the way it's going to be, and kind of the reality and the subsequent depression, right, as a function of acceptance. So to the extent, I'm reading a lot of Stoic literature right now, and accept the things that you can't change is one of the main lessons of Stoicism. And if you have a terminal illness, if you're dying and your time is up, acceptance is probably one adjustment that makes the most sense. All right. At some point, raging against the machine might yield no results other than making one feel worse. So coping with the death of someone else, most psychologists believe it's best for dying individuals, right, significant others, to know they're dying so they can interact and communicate with each other. Advantages of shared awareness with the dying individuals, not trying to hide it from them. They can close their lives in accord with their own ideas about proper dying, as they can come more from a point of choice. They may be able to complete projects, make arrangements for survivors, and participate in their own funeral decisions. They can have an opportunity to reminisce and converse with others. Dying individuals understand what's happening within their bodies and what medical staff is doing with them, right? These are tough issues to deal with, right? And especially with my mom over this long period of time, we were able to kind of meet her wishes to the greatest extent that we could. With my dad, it was more complicated because his sister was involved, and she and I had very different opinions on it, on what should be done. My dad wanted to go home. He had stage 4 lung cancer. He was 77 years old. He smoked all his life, no surprise. He wanted to go home, and he was asking me to facilitate his transition back to his condominium so that he could just die in his condominium rather than the hospital. My aunt, on the other hand, who was a very skilled nurse all her life, wanted to fight the good fight and thought he should fight the good fight, and she was convinced they were going to beat this thing. And so that meant staying in the hospital and being subjected to more and more treatments, which was eventually he died during one of those treatments in the hospital. There's nothing that could be done about that, right? She had the upper hand in the situation, and we had to go with her. So, adjustment strategies for communication with a dying person. Establish your presence. Make sure they know you're there. Eliminate distractions. So, can I turn down the TV or whatever? Right. Be sensitive to how long you should stay. And a lot of times we feel guilty that we're maybe not going to stay long enough. But often people who are dying become tired very easily. So we need to think in terms of, a 5-minute conversation with someone who's suffering some kind of severe cancer, maybe about all they can take, right? Don't insist the person feel acceptance of death. That's up to them, not up to you. And please don't be telling them what to do, right? Encourage expressions of feelings. How do you feel? Don't be afraid to ask what expected outcome of their illness. What's your prognosis? What does it sound like? Ask if there's someone they'd like to see, and this is something you can do to facilitate, right? That is, do you want anyone to come visit you? Should I go get someone or tell them? Encourage the dying person to reminisce and talk about those good things. Try to have that positive kind of life review going. Talk when he or she wishes to, but don't be afraid to just sit there by them and express your regard for the dying person. Allow them to state their piece and allow them to express their wishes. I remember my dad in this situation. I think it was the last day that I saw him in the hospital before I had to go back up to Washington State for a little while. He was in Southern California. And he said, "So Mark," and I said, "Yeah, Dad." And he says, "I've saved a little money." And I said, "Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. You've always been good with money." And he says, "My condominium is paid for." And I said, "That doesn't surprise me either. You've been in there, 20 years? And he said, "Here's the deal. I'm leaving it." He said, "I'm leaving everything to you. I'm leaving you the condo. I'm leaving you the small savings." And he says, "You ought to consider quitting your job, going to school full time so you actually finish school in your lifetime." Which, he said it with his typical sarcastic tone and bent. And I said, well, that could happen. Seriously, that could happen. So let's not talk about that anymore because it's making me sad. And he said, "No, that's fine. I want you to know that." And then he died. He died a week later. And 6 months later, I quit my job at the paper mill in Washington, moved down to the condominium in Anaheim, got myself into community college, get my GECs done with, and then transferred to University of California, Irvine. Got my bachelor's and applied to Ohio State, and this is how all this occurred. So grief can present itself in many different ways. It can be an emotional numbness. It can be disbelief, kind of the denial thing like Kubler-Ross was talking about. There can be separation anxiety, like, oh my God, I'm alone, especially if it's a spousal issue, right? Despair, sadness, loneliness that accompanies the loss of someone you love. For most individuals, grief becomes manageable over time, but for some, it never does. And the timetable varies, right? So there's not like, oh my God, they've been gone 6 months, you need to buck up, little buckaroo. Or, it's been a year now. That's not necessarily the way it goes down. People are going to grieve in their own time. Many grieving spouses report that they've never gotten over their loss. Now, they may have adjusted to the loss, but that's not the same as getting over it. Okay? So, that's kind of the story on the end of life. Let's shift gears. Let's go back to this idea then. Back to this idea. Let's talk about our homework a little. And kind of a change of subject, if you will. Here's what I was thinking. So, negotiating life stages and the application of wellness dimensions. Let's morph those together because I want wellness dimensions to be something we revisit through this course. Big question then. For transition from one stage to another, what are two wellness dimensions that are implicated and why? So let me explain. Erik Erikson, our buddy. So Dr. Erikson, we're going to hang with you throughout this assignment. As a team, please choose two adjacent life stages from Erikson's 8 stages. So the initial stage selected and the stage that follows the stage is selected. So if we're looking at the stage of adolescence with the identity crisis, what comes afterwards? Young adulthood and intimacy versus isolation. So select the first stage, right? And then the second stage is selected for you because it's the one that comes immediately after. What is a crisis and conflict that needs to be resolved to successfully move from the first stage you selected to the next later stage? And this is just available to you on the chart. Give 2 applied real-world examples of what that means, what the resolution of that crisis would look like. So if you're focusing on the identity crisis, what are 2 actual things that happen in life that would indicate, right, that I'm developing a solidified identity? That is the positive aspect of moving from one life stage to the other. Okay? So give 2 applied real-world examples to that. And then what virtue would be gained with the successful resolution of that earlier stage? And I got the map here coming for you, so fear not there. Now, next, how does a successful resolution of that crisis prepare you for the next stage? And then let's tie the wellness dimensions in. What 2 wellness dimensions would facilitate the resolution of that crisis conflict? So you kind of get where I'm going here? That is, let's look at the stage and then let's look at the preparatory kind of involvement in the wellness domains that would help us resolve that crisis, right? So I got a feeling, I don't know, because I've never pitched this assignment to a class before, I got to imagine that you're probably going to pick something forward-looking, that is a stage you're at and where you'll be going, but you can go backwards in time too and imagine it for children, and you might even think of it kind of as an exercise in understanding what your own children might go through at some given stage, right? Finally, what is the new crisis of the second stage you've chosen? What 2 wellness dimensions would facilitate successfully advancing out of that stage? So it's not a huge assignment, but I think it's a thoughtful assignment, if you will. And if you want to kind of just answer it, I've set up a template for you, and it's in Carmen, right, with the assignment. So you can just answer these questions directly. You don't have to write a paper. Penelope, where have you been? Usually you're here for our lectures. All right, well, I'm glad that you showed up towards the end here, and you came to say hello to everybody. Here's some neat info on Erickson. There's a website I found this morning. I thought it was really cool. Bunch of stuff on Erickson that might help you with the assignment, right? Because we're doing this book list, textbook list, so sometimes maybe some outside sources will help. And here's a different chart than we had in our previous lecture. So, and I like this because it shows the stages, right? And then it shows a question. So like intimacy versus isolation. What's going on? Young adults struggle to form close relationships and gain the capacity for intimate love, or they will be socially isolated. So that's kind of the stage. We said the intimacy versus isolation is crisis, so that's answering that question. What wellness dimensions would help facilitate the positive aspect, developing intimacy versus moving towards isolation? And that's up to you, because I imagine that there's a lot of ways to apply these wellness dimensions in that regard. So again, kind of a relatively kind of subjective assignment in that regard. I'm interested in your thinking. Now, this is a table here. There's another table that will be helpful and includes the virtues on this website that I'm explaining, and you'll need that to, in fact, answer one of the questions. What is it? Question 3, maybe. And that's your assignment. Okay, so the template is available on Carmen, and so it goes. Let's stop with a flower. A couple flowers, and this was a nice little assortment of flowers in that particular year. So so it is for lifespan development, and I hope that we can successfully tie in the wellness dimensions for negotiating the crises that or conflicts that Erickson says we must all kind of meet to move forward, or not meet and remain kind of static. Thank you, guys. I hope you have a good day.